How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tes, Daf 99. Of Masechtas Zevachim. Friends, wow. We're 3 weeks away from the end of Masechtas Zevachim. Unbelievable. Anyways, well, I'll tell you this, we got a lot of work to do before then, I'll tell you that much. Today we begin Perek Tvul Yom. Perek Tvul Yom, and from what I can tell, it's not going to be an easy perek. But who knows what I could tell? But I mean, if if the first 100 pages of Masechtas Zevachim were any indication, that's probably accurate, likely. Anyways, on today's daf, we begin the 12th perek of Masechtas Zevachim, talking about. So first, we start with the Mishnah, and as we talk about dividing up korbin meat. Who can eat korbin meat? Let's talk about that, right? Tvul Yom, Mechusar Kippurim, Babble, Onain, right? We talk about, can they eat korbanis? Can they not? Can it be divided up for them or not? The questions around that. There's going to be a very detailed chunk of today's daf that discusses, can an Onain touch korbanis? Because the Mishnah says that an Onain can touch korbanis, but it touches on, no pun intended. It touches on, can an Onain do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash? Can a Kohen eat the korbanos? And then, that relates to if they could touch korbanos. So that becomes an interesting thing, gets into some tumah and tyra sugyas over there. And finally, can an Onain eat korbanos at night? And this is really a segue, I think, in tomorrow's daf, which looks like a major daf tomorrow, a major piece of work tomorrow about the sugya of what it looks like the sugya of Onain. The sugya of Onain was like, I always have questions on the sugya of Onain about how that works, when it starts, when it ends, what's the raisa, what's the rabbanon. Anyways, so it's like tomorrow really, tomorrow's gonna be a big old daf, I think, especially because I'm leaving about half of Tzadi Testament Beis today, because it really starts, tomorrow's daf really starts on Tzadi Testament Beis and doesn't really end until Kuf Aleph. Anyways, Chavit, this is what we have ahead of us. We are beginning Perek Tvul Yom, and we're jumping right, as my father would say, the retna smetna, right into the, I don't really know, right into the sour cream or something. We're jumping right into we're jumping right into the sour cream. So come join me in the sour cream. It's going to be fun. All right, we're all here in the sour cream. Let's go. Plenty of room. Says the Mishnah on Daf Tes Amid Beis at the beginning of Perek Tvul Yom. Umechusar Kippurim. Einan cholkin bekodshim lechol la'erev. Okay, so a Tvul Yom. Let's say somebody touched dead sharets, okay? So now they are tamei, and they have to go to the mikvah, and then they remain tamei until, they're a Tvul Yom, between the time they go to the mikvah until the end of the day. Mechusar Kippurim is, let's say, for example, a mitzora. Mitzora, at the end of there's a whole elaborate purification process. The final thing that he does is, on day 9, the morning of day 9, he brings korbanis. I believe that's, or is that day 8? No, it's probably day 8. And on day 7 he goes to the mikvah. I believe day 8 he brings his korbanis. So between day 7 when he goes to the mikvah and day 8 when he brings his korbanis, in between that period, so meaning when he goes to the mikvah on day 7, so then he's a Tvul Yom until the night. Comes the night, he's now Mechusar Kippurim until the next morning when he brings his korbanis. So a Tvul Yom, a Mechusar Kippurim, Einon cholkin bekodshim. So assuming that they are kohanim, right? So Ruvain the Kohen, the Tvul Yom, Ruvain the Kohen, the Mechusar Kippurim, cannot, right? So his friends, the Kohanim, they say, Ruvain, come join us in the korbanis. We're all going to be eating korbins tonight. It's going to be awesome. He can't get a portion, right? So if Ruvain the Kohen is a Tvul Yom, right, touched the dead chariots, now he's tamei, went to the mikvah, he's going to be tamei until the evening. And his friends say, we're all going to be getting together and eating korban chatas tonight. You want to join us? He says, I do, but they can't give him his own portion since he is a Tvul Yom. Same for a Mechusar Kippurim. Now, comes that night, the Tvul Yom, for example, touch the dead sheretz comes at night. He could already, if one of his friends wants to give him a bite of their meat, that would be okay. But he wouldn't get his own portion. Now, Mechusar Kippurim, it says, but I think a Mechusar Kippurim, you see, a Mechusar Kippurim, I think Be'etzem he would just bring. So I think Be'etzem, Mechusar Kippurim, just has to bring their korbanis. Once they bring their korbanis, I think they then go to the mikvah, and then they can, I think, eat kachim right away. I don't think that they have to wait until the evening, but a Tvul Yom would. Assuming that he's not then going to be a Mechusar Kippurim, right? Meaning, you have a Tvul Yom of a sheretz who comes the evening, done. There's nothing more to do. Tvul Yom of a Zav or a Mitzorah, they still have to bring korbanis the next day. Then there would be a Mechusar Kippurim. Anyways, so a Tvul Yom. Okay, when it comes to Tvul Yom, somebody touches dead sheretz, they went to the mikvah. Now they have to wait till the nighttime. They can't set aside a portion he doesn't get his own portion. He can that night eat kachim meat. So if his friend wants to give him part of his part of theirs, so that's fine. But he wouldn't get his own portion. Now, a Mechusar Kippurim is somebody who is no longer a Tvul Yom. Already went to the mikvah. At the end of the day, he's no longer a Tvul Yom. All that's missing, he has to bring his korbanis. So also, so long as he hasn't brought his korbanis, we wouldn't give him his own portion, nor would he be able to eat korbanis. But then once he brings his korbanis, wait, what? I feel like I'm using korbanis too much. He wouldn't get his own portion, right? And you also wouldn't be able to eat any of the kachim. Once he brings the korbanis that he needs to bring, and then he goes to the mikvah, and now he can eat. At that point, he's done. I think that's how I understand it. There's so many details on these things. Each one of these things. When did the things start? When did they stop? What's allowed? What's not allowed? But anyways, I think a Mechusar Kippurim, once he brings whatever korbanos he has to bring, I think he then goes to the mikvah. That's what the Rambam says. He goes to the mikvah. I think immediately after he goes to the mikvah, he's now done. This is all behind him. I think at that point he can right away, I think, get a portion. I don't think he has to wait till that night or anything. I think immediately he can already start getting portions and eating and everything like that. Okay. So I think that the Lechol La'erev, I think that's probably more for the Tvul Yom, and the Mechusar Kippurim is more the fact that so long as he hasn't brought his korbanos, we wouldn't set aside any portions for him, even though, let's say it's the morning and he says to his friends, oh, can you set me aside a portion? I'm just going to bring my korbanos this morning and then I'm going to join you later to eat the meat. They say, no, we can't set you aside a portion until you bring your korbanos. Once he brings the korbanos, then he can start getting a portion. Okay. I hope that stuff is accurate. If anybody has any ideas, any other alternative approaches, let us know. Onain. Now, when it comes to an Onain, Nogeya, okay. Now, an Onain is allowed to touch Kodshim. An Onain is allowed to touch Kodshim. That's no problem. Ve'eno makriv, but an Onain does not offer korbanos, does not do avoda in the Beis Mikdash. A kohen gadol can do avoda in the Beis Mikdash, but a kohen edged cannot. Benu cholek lechol le'erev, nor does a kohen, and this applies whether a kohen or a kohen gadol, kohen edged, doesn't matter. An onain who's a kohen would not get a portion to eat that night. Would not receive a portion to eat that night. Now it's going to be a gemara. Shiloh, we're going to get to. We're going to discuss kind of all of the Onain. The Onain is going to be, I think, kind of the trickier part of today's daf. What's all that noise? There's so much noise going around me. Not like so much noise. Not like the noise. It's 8 a.m, so it's not like at night. No, that's bad noise. This is just life noise, normal noise. Anyways, so anyways, what was I saying? Anyway, so the Onain, there's a lot of details that we can get into the Onain. So it's going to be a shaila in the Gemara. Can an Onain eat korbanos at night? That's going to be a shaila. But anyways, okay. So what are we saying here? We're saying that an Onain nogea, he could touch kachim, ve'eno makriv, but he can't offer kachim. At least not a kohen hedjed. A kohen gadol can be makriv, but a kohen edged cannot be makriv. Now, ve'enu cholik lechol le'erev, this applies to both a kohen gadol and a kohen edged. They would not receive any portions to be able to eat korban, to be able to eat kachim at night. Now, does this imply that an Onain can b'chlal eat kachim at night? It's a shaila. The Gemara is going to discuss it on Tzadi Tes Amid Beis. Baile Mumin, when it comes to Baal Mums, right, a kohen who pashat, he has a blemish that precludes him from being able to do work in the Beis HaMikdash. Bein Baile Mumin Ovim bin Baile Mumin Kavun, whether this is a mum, a temporary blemish that's going to pass, or whether it's a permanent blemish that's going to be with him the rest of his life. Cholkin, they do receive a portion of the kachim, ve'ochlin, and they also eat the kachim. Avalo makrivin, but they can't do the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. Baal mum cannot do the avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, but they do eat korbanis. They get their own portion of korbanis. Now the Mishnah says something peculiar because it seems to fly in the face of what we literally just said. Kol she'ena roy la'avoda, anybody who's not fit for avoda, eino cholik b'basar, does not receive any meat, which is weird because we just said that a Baal mum, who is not roy la'avoda, he does receive meat. So we're going to have to explain what that means. We're not going to get to it today, but I believe that we will have to explain what that means. V'chol she'en lo b'basar, now anybody who receives no meat, ein lo be'oris, also receives no hides. This would, I assume, be by a korbin ola, where the Kohanim get the hides. If one is in a position where they would not receive meat of korbanis, they also would not receive hides. Afilu tameh b'shas zrikas damim v'tar b'shas ekter chalavim. When is shas zrikas adamim? Shas zrikas adamim is during the daytime until shkia. At that point, you can no longer do zrikas adam. Shas ekter chalavim bevarim is of course the nighttime, because you could do hekter chalavim bevarim all night. So tameh b'shas zrikas damim. If you have a kohen who is tameh, let's say for example tvul yom. Right, he's tamei during the day, but v'tar b'shas hekter chalavim comes the time of hekter chalavim devarim, i.e. at night is ready tahor. Einu cholik b'basar, as we had said, he will not receive a portion of the meat. Shenemar, as the Bible says, hamakriv es dam shlamim, he who offers the blood of the shlamim ve'es cheleb, as well as the cheleb. So you have to be, I think how to understand the pasuk is that you have to be tahor for both during the day as well as during the night. They will be able to receive the right thigh, i.e. they will be able to receive portions of meat. If you are tahor during the day, during the night, you can receive a portion of meat. However, if you are tameh, like a tvul yom, or for whatever reason you can't do the avoda, whatever it is, if any of the examples that we had in our Mishnah would not receive portions of korbin meat. Says the Gemara Menan Emili, how do we know this? How do we know these rules about who can eat meat, who gets portions? Amr Shlakish says, the pasuk says, Hakoin amechate osa yochelen. Well, the pasuk says that the kohen who does the zrikas adam, he's the one who eats the korbin. Kohen amechate oichel shen amechate no ochel. The kohen who does the zrikas adam, he eats the korbin. And if the kohen does not do zrikas adam, he doesn't eat the korbin. V'chlalu, 1 second, is that really the rule? V'arei mishmara kula dein mechaten v'ochlin. In fact, the Gemara, 1 second. That's not how it works. It's not that only the kohen who does the avoda on this particular korbin, he's the one who eats the korbin. Nobody else eats it. That's not true. The mishmar, right? Of course, the kohanim were divided into 24 groups, and they would each have 2 weeks a year, be'etzem, and then all the kohanim I think would work on the shalosh regalim. Anyways, so you have a mishmar that with a shift that was working in the Beis HaMikdash that week. Anybody in the mishmar is able to eat from the korbanis, not just the person who technically did the zrikas adam. Anybody in the mishmar can eat the meat, even though they're not doing the zrikas adam. Ra'ui lechitur ka'aminan. So the Gemara says, no. So what it means, not that only the person who technically did the zrikas adam is the one who eats the korbin, but anybody who's fit to do zrikas adam can eat the korbin. Okay? To the exclusion of let's not talk about what the exclusion is. Fine, they can eat the meat. Fine. Alright? Well, we can't talk about the exclusion. So for example, tvul yom, The reason why I didn't want to say it because at night you can eat the meat. But let's say they're eating meat during the day. So a tvul yom can't right now do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, so they also can't eat the meat, right? So the Mishnah is saying, so the pasuk is saying, not literally the person who does the Zrikas Adam only can eat the meat, but anybody who's fit to do the Zrikas Adam is able to eat the meat, to the exclusion of Tvul Yom, Chosek Kippurim, Onain, people who are unable to do the avodah. But Arei Kotin, what about a minor? The Eino Roi L'chito, a minor is not allowed to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. He can't do the Zrikas Adam. V'ochel, and yet a minor does eat. A kohen who's a minor is permitted to eat the meat. So clearly something is not right here, right? We had said only people who are fit to do the Zrikas Adam can eat the meat. A minor eats meat and he's not fit to do Zrikas Adam. Elo ma yochlena yichal kena. Okay, so the Gemara says, when the pasuk says yochelena, it means yichal, kena, to divide it up. A katan doesn't get his own portion. Let's say his father received a portion, so his child, who's a minor, can share his father's portion, let's say. A kohen would not get his own portion. So when we're saying those who are fit to do the Zrikas Adam, yochelena, it means yichal kena. Those who are fit to do Zrikas Adam get their own portion, to the exclusion of a Tvul Yom, a Chosek Kippurim, an Onain, a Kotin. These are all people who don't do Zrikas Adam, and therefore they don't get their own portion, even if, for example, the Kotin can eat the meat, but he won't get his own portion. Roi L'chitoi Cholek, Shena Roi L'chitoi Eno Cholek. Somebody who's fit to do Zrikas Adam gets their own portion. If they're unfit to do Zrikas Adam, they do not receive their own portion. Arei Balmum. What about a Balmum though? The Eno Roi L'chitoi V'Cholek. A Baal Mum, however, what do we say in the Mishnah? We said Baal Mumin, Beimalun Oven, Beimalun Kvun, Cholkin, V'Ochlin. A Baal Mum does not do Zrikas Adam, and yet the Mishnah had said that he receives his own portion. That goes against how we are defining this pasuk. That when it says that somebody who's fit to do Zrikas Adam, Yochalena Ayi Yichal Kena, gets their own portion. Baal Mum is unfit to do Zrikas Adam, and yet receives their own portion. Ba'amum Rachman Rabbi. Well, Ba'amum is an exception because there's a specific pasuk in the Torah that comes to say that a Ba'amum receives his own portion even though he doesn't do Zrikas Adam. Kol Zocher B'Kriyanim. When the pasuk says all priestly males, L'Rabos Ba'amum, all priestly males is coming to include a Ba'amum. That a Ba'amum, even though he doesn't do Zrikas Adam, however, he will receive his own portion. Wait. How do we know that this ribuy of kol zachar comes to include a Baal Mum? Maybe it comes to include a Tvul Yom, that a Tvul Yom can receive a portion, right? That night he'll be able to, that night the Tvul Yom will be able to eat korbanis, right? Assuming that he's like not a Zav or a Mitzorah who will be a Chosek Kippurim and has to bring korbanis the next day, but something like a sheretz or something. So that night he'll be able to eat the meat. So maybe what it's saying is that a kol zachar b'ka'anim is coming to include even a Tvul Yom who at the moment can't do Zrikas Adam, gets his own portion since that night he will be able to eat it. Okay, so between the Tvul Yom and the Baal Mum, it makes more sense to say that the Baal Mum will be receiving a portion. Sheken ochel, because the Baal Mum can eat it. The Baal Mum can actually eat it, and therefore he's the one who is included in getting a portion. No. I'll argue the opposite. Since sure the Tvul Yom can eat it right now, but comes tonight, he'll mamish be able to do the whole avodah. He'll be completely pure. He'll be mamish a kohen who's completely capable of doing any kind of avodah. Just wait. You just need to wait till the night. Hello, Chazi. Yes, but the fact of the matter is, that's very nice that the Tvul Yom comes the evening, will be able to be a full-fledged doer in the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, right now, he is a full-fledged not doer. Right now, he's not able to do anything, can't even eat, nothing. Baal Mum at least can eat korbanis right now, and he is the one who is included in the pasuk of Kol Zachar B'Kriyanim to say that a Baal Mum can receive a portion even though he can't do Zrikas Adam. Rav Yosef answers this question of who's being included in the pasuk of Kol Zachar B'Kohanim. Is it a Baal Mum? Is it a Tvul Yom? He answers it by saying, well, look at the pasuk. Let's see. My Yochalena Yichalkena. We said that when the pasuk says Akoyin Mechate Osa Yochalena, what does Yochalena mean? It means Yichalkena. That anybody who's fit to do Zrikas Adam will receive a portion. Lichtor Rachmana Yichalkena. So then why does the pasuk say Yochalena if it technically really should say Hakoyin Mechate Osa Yichalkena, not Yochalena? Why does it talk about eating when really it should be dividing up? So my Yochalena, why does it say to eat it? Shmamina ro'ui la'achila cholek, sheni ro'ui la'achila eno cholek. It's coming to teach that, to answer our question, that who should be included in the pasuk of Kol Zachar B'Kohanim? Should we come to say that a Baal Mum gets on his own portion, or a Tvul Yom gets their own portion? The answer is a Baal Mum would get his own portion, because the pasuk says Yochalena, even though it should have said Yichalkena, to teach that somebody who can eat receives a portion rather than somebody who can't eat. The Baal Mum can eat korbanis right now, so he's the one who receives a portion. The Tvul Yom cannot currently eat korbanis, therefore he does not receive a portion. I'm going to drink a shtickle water and then we will go weiter. Says the Gemara, Rish Lakish asks a question. Mum v'hu tamei ma'u shechalku. If you have a Baal Mum, Baal Mum v'hu tamei ma'u shechalku lo. If you have a Baal Mum who's also tamei, can he receive a portion of the korbanis? Kevan dilo chazi v'rachmana rabye. Since, look, to begin with, a Baal Mum is somebody who is unfit to do avoda, and he's kind of right? He's a Baal Mum, he's unfit, milichatchila, and yet the Torah says that he receives a portion. So lo shnan, I'm going to read it with the amendment of the Gav Sabach. Mali Baal Mum umali Baal Mum v'hu tamei. So therefore, I could say, look, milichatchila, when it comes to the Baal Mum, he's an exception to the rule. A Baal Mum, he's not allowed to do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, and yet the Torah says we waive for some reason, even though right Maker Adin, a Baal Mum should not receive a portion. You can't do the Zrikas Adam. And yet, the Torah makes an exception for the Baal Mum. So once already we're making an exception for the Baal Mum, what's the difference if the exception is because he's a Baal Mum, or if it's because of Baal Mum and also Tamei? The exception is being made for somebody who is technically unfit to nonetheless be able to receive a portion. And therefore, what's the difference if he's unfit because he's a Baal Mum, or if he's unfit because he's a Baal Mum and he's Tamei? Makes no difference. I'll argue he should be able to receive a portion. Odilma, or perhaps Roy La'achila Cholek Shen Roy La'achila Eno Cholek, or do we say, look, but there is a big difference between a Baal Mum, a plain Baal Mum, and a Baal Mum who's Tamei. The difference is a plain Baal Mum can eat korbanis. A Baal Mum who's Tamei cannot eat korbanis. So the question is, can a Baal Mum who's Tamei receive a portion? Do we go based on the fact that exceptions are made for Baal Mums, regardless of if he's also Tamei, an exception will be made? Or do we say that the reason why a Baal Mum gets a portion is because he can eat, but here he can't eat when he's Tamei? Omar Rabba says, Rabba Tashma Kaminir Kohen Gadol Makriv Onain. Well, a Kohen Gadol can offer korbanis. He can mamish do the avoda. A Kohen Gadol is allowed to do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. Kohen Ejid cannot. But a Kohen Gadol who's an Onain is allowed to do avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, but ve'eino ochel. But he's not allowed to eat. Kohen Gadol who's an Onain is not allowed to eat korbanis. He's allowed to do avoda. He can't eat korbanis as long as he is an Onain. Ve'eino cholek, and he doesn't receive any portion lechol la'erev to eat that night. So shmamina roi lachila ba'ina shmamina. We see that in order to receive a portion, you have to be able to eat the korbanis. If you can't eat the korbanis, you don't receive a portion. And therefore, to answer our question, a Baal Mum who's Tamei and can't therefore eat the korbanis would not receive a portion. But Rav Oshaya asks a question, Tamei bekorbanos tzibur ma'u sheichal klo. What about a kohen who is Tamei, but we're talking about a communal offering. Now, a kohen who's tameh, right? Tuma hutra b'tzibur. A kohen who's tameh is permitted to do the service for a communal offering. So can he receive a portion from the communal offering? Right, let's say it's like the chatos of Rosh Chodesh. So korban chatos would be eaten by the kohanim. It's a communal offering. Can a kohen who's tameh, who could technically do the zrikas adam for the communal offering, can he receive a portion of it? Do we say, look, the pasuk that said according to machate osa yochlen, that somebody who can do zrikas adam and he can do zrikas adam? Or do we say, look, in order to receive a portion, you have to be fit to eat the korbin, and since he's tamei, he can't eat the korbin, therefore he receives no portion of it. Amar Ravina, says Ravina Tashma, come in here, kohen gadol, makar vein onain, vein ochel, vein cholik lechol erev. A kohen gadol, once again, a kohen gadol is an onain, is permitted to do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, but he can't eat korbanis, and therefore, because he can't eat the korbanis, he does not receive a portion for that night. Shmamina, shmamina. So we see that in order to be able to receive a portion, you must be able to eat it. And therefore, to answer our question, a kohen who is tameh, when it comes to a korban tzibur that he's able to do zrikas adam for, can he receive a portion of it? The answer is he does not receive a portion of it since he can't eat it. So to kind of sum up, who receives a portion? The answer is those who can do zrikas adam. Okay, so therefore that includes like people in the Mishmar who themselves didn't actually do the avoda. And they have to be able to eat it. Those are the two criteria, right? So even if you have somebody who can do zrikas adam but can't eat it, like the kohen gadol who's an onain, or somebody who can eat it but can't do the zrikas hadam. What's an example of somebody who can eat it, like a katan, for example? Somebody who can eat but doesn't do zrikas adam. So in both of those cases, they'll be excluded from a portion. In order to get a portion, you have to be able to do zrikas adam and eat the korban. The exception being the balmum. Even though he can't do the zrikas adam, he can eat the korban and he receives a portion. Okay, friends, now we are moving on to onains. I think onains are going to last us, several days now. It's a little bit of a tricky topic. I'll tell you, onain is always a topic. I'm hoping to get some clarity about onain. I kind of have some ideas about onain, but it's always a little tricky for me exactly how onain works. When is a person considered an onain? When are they not considered an onain? What's aninus yom, aninus laila? There's also the concept of a person is an onain until they're first of all, what is an onain, by the way? An onain is somebody who a relative has died, right? So let's say somebody's parent died. So that person is an onain, right? If Reuven, let's use Reuven the kohen, right? Since we're talking about kohanim over here in the Beis Hamikdash and korbanis, so you have Reuven the kohen, and his father Yaakov the kohen dies. So Reuven now is a onain because his relative died. What does that mean? Like, when is he an onain? When does it end? So look, so Pashtus is the day that Yaakov, his father, dies, Reuven will be an onain that day. Mida Oraisa, that day is an onain. Now comes the nighttime. There's what's called aninus laila. There's nighttime aninus, which is derabanan. So he's an onain Mida Oraisa that day. Right, and then the night that follows, he's an onain Mida Rabbanan, aninus laila. Okay. Now, I believe he continues being an onain midirabanan until the relative, in this case Yaakov, the father, is buried. I believe that at that point, once the relative is buried, I believe that at that point aninus dirabanan ends. Okay, but anyway, so now in onain we had said can touch korbanos. So now we are going to move on to discussing in onain touching korbanos and the details around that. We're going to get into some Tuma and Tyra. It's going to be exciting times here at Babble on Talmud. Onain nogev and umakar v'chulei. So we said that a kohen, Reuven the kohen, whose father Yaakov the kohen died. So now Reuven the kohen is an onain. So we say he cannot offer korbanos. A kohen gadol can, but a kohen hedjed cannot offer korbanos. But he can touch the korbanis. You could touch the korbanis, just can't offer them, can't eat them. You could touch them though. Onain nogeh. What do you mean? What do you mean? Onain can touch korbanis. We have a Mishnah in Masechta Chagiga that says Onain u'mechusar kippurim tzrichin tvila lekodesh. That in Onain and a mechusar kippurim need to go to the mikvah before they can get involved with kodesh. So we see from the Mishnah in Chagiga that in Onain can't, it would seem like an Onain can't touch kachim. He has to go to the mikvah first. So Reb Ami Reb Yochanan Kasha Kam B'Shetavo Kam B'Shet Tavo. So Reb Ami Reb Yochanan starts us off by giving us the easy answer, which is, okay, well, when the Mishnah in Chagiga says that in Onain needs to go to the mikvah, it's because he hasn't yet gone to the mikvah. So he has to go to the mikvah. When the Mishnah here in Zevachim says that in Onain can touch korbanis, it's because he already went to the mikvah. The Gemara says, wait, one second. Right? There's a concept, for example, of it doesn't say this anywhere, but I'm saying it. I didn't see it anywhere, but there's a concept, of course, of tovel v'sheretz biyado. Right? If a person goes to the mikvah while holding on to a dead sheretz, what's the point of going to the mikvah? You're still holding on to a dead sheretz, it's still going to be tummy. So similarly over here, a person who's an Onain who goes to the mikvah, the second they come out of the mikvah, they're still an Onain. So what is going to the mikvah? If you have to go to the mikvah, then what is going to the mikvah help? When you're still an Onain. Okay, after you're an Onain, you're no longer an Onain, and we're saying now you go to the mikvah. Are we going to explain why? I think, yeah, we are going to explain one, but I'll just say now, meaning, why would an Onain have to go to the mikvah? Because an Onain is so Reuven the Kohen, when he's not in Onain and he's able to work normally in the base of Mikdash, so he's on high alert to make sure that he won't become tummy. He sees a dead sheretz, he runs the other way. He's on high alert. He says, I have to be able to do avod in the base of Mikdash. I want to be able to eat korbanis. I want to enjoy myself. I want to take full advantage of my week as part of this mishmar. And I want to, I want to make the most of my week in the base of Mikdash. So Reuven the Kohen, when he has the opportunity to serve in the base of Mikdash, he's on high alert to make sure that he remains tahor. However, when he becomes an Onain, and he says, well, I can't work in the base, chaval, I can't work in the base of Mikdash, I'm an Onain. I can't eat korbanis, I'm an Onain. So he lets down his guard. He lets his guard down, and maybe he'll become tamei. So as the Rambam calls it, a maile, as meaning, as we're going to see in the Gemara, like if he literally became tamei, I don't really understand how going to the mikvah is necessarily going to help that, assuming that it's like tumah deoraisa, like a dead sheretz or something, it's still going to be a tvul yom. But nonetheless, as some kind of like a maile, they call it, they say, you know what, just in case, we have no evidence that if he knows for sure that he became tamei and he's, that's going to be a tvul yom, that's a different story. But even a Onain who has no knowledge that they became tamei, but has a certain maila, since conceptually they may have let their guard down, we on principle we say that they should go to the mikvah. Now, so what did we just say? So we said there was a kam shetov kam shlotov chitov mayave ohadra ole aninus. How did I even get into that? I explained why an Onain goes to the mikvah, but okay, and it will be important in a minute. But anyways, we said, okay, fine. So if the Onain has already gone to so we said our Mishnah is talking about where he already went to the mikvah. Okay. Now the Mishnah in Chagiga is saying he has to go to the mikvah because he hasn't gone to the mikvah. But we said, v'chitavo mayave, what does going to the mikvah accomplish? Hadra ole aninos, he's still an Onain. And if we're saying that Onains need to go to the mikvah, he is still an Onain. The Omar Rabbi Bar Reb Huna, Onain shetovel, aninos chazaris olav, that an Onain who goes to the mikvah, he is still going to be an Onain. So elo kasha the osach daite or the osach daite. So the Gemara answers, okay, well, one second, and this relates to what I just said a minute ago. What's the point of an Onain going to the mikvah? He's not be'etzim tamei. He isn't be'etzim tamei. It's a maila, right? So we said, well, because he may have let down his guard. So we say, well, if he let down his guard, that's the Mishnah in Chagiga that says he has to go to the mikvah. However, if he hasn't let down his guard, he doesn't have to go to the mikvah. And that's our Mishnah here in Zevachim. He didn't let down his guard, and therefore he could touch korbanos. And even if he did let down his guard, so he goes to the mikvah, and now, until he lets down his guard again, he's tahor. And he could touch korbanos. So again, when he had hesech hadas, he let down his guard, so he has to go to the mikvah, like the Mishnah says in Chagiga. But in Zevachim, we're talking about where there was no hesech hadas, he still was on high alert to protect himself from tumah, and therefore he can touch korbanos. But frankly, Gemara, I don't understand. Hesech hadas, hazah shlishi v'shvi, boy. If it's all about if he let down his guard or not, if he let down his guard, what if he became tmei meis? Then going to the mikvah is not the solution. You have to wait a week and have Efer Par Aduma, day 3, day 7. That if a person has hesech hadas and lets the guard down and becomes tmei meis, they're going to have to have azah on day 3 and day 7. Not just go to the mikvah. So it can't just be about hesech hadas. Lokasha hada asach daite mitmei meis, hada asach daite mitmei sheres. Well, it depends what he let down his guard about. If he let down his guard about tumas hameis, yeah, then we're talking about a week of tumah, par aduma, day 3, day 7. But if we're talking about tumas sheretz, well, then there is no week of tumah and sprinkling of the mechatas on day 3, day 7. It's just you go to the mikvah and that you're Torah that night. But tmei sheretz, tamei ma'alya, who? But still, at the end of the day, tumas hasheretz is tumah de oraisa. Harav shemesh nami ba. You're going to be tummy that whole day. It's not just about going to the mikvah. And now all of a sudden you could, touch korbanos. What do you mean? If you touch the dead sheretz, you're tummy the whole day. Even after you go to the mikvah, you're then at full yom until the evening. Ve'od afilu truma nami. And more so, that Mishnah in Chagiga that says, Onain u'mechusar kippurim tzrichen tvila lekodesh, it says, but not for truma. When it says that a Onain needs to go to the mikvah for kachim, it says, but not for truma, however. Now the thing is, if we're talking about that he touched a dead sheretz, well then of course he should have to go to the mikvah also for truma, he's tameh. So Amar Reb Yirmiyah, so says Reb Yirmiyah, Be'omer nishmarti midvar mitamani v'lo nishmarti midvar aposlani. Okay, so it says Reb Yirmiyah, here is the deal. Here is the deal. We're talking about where Reuven the Kohen says, look, I let down my guard, but, only smallly, only minorly, I let down my guard. In terms of Tumah de Oraisa, Tumas Hameis, Tumas Sheretz, no way, no, I kept my guard up on for that. Yeah, that's for sure. I am not Tameh, Tumas Hameis or Tumas Sheretz or anything de Oraisa that requires, Tvul Yom, making a Tvul Yom, Paraduma, no, for sure not. I may have let down my guard a little bit. Maybe I became some kind of a Tumah de Rabbanan, that the kind of Tumah that you just go to the mikvah and immediately you're tahor. There's no Tvul Yom, no anything like that. That may be. So in that case, where Reuven says it's possible that maybe I'm slightly tamei midrabanan, that nothing that a going to the mikvah can't fix. So in that case, the Mishnah in Chagiga says in that case he has to go to the mikvah. And then once he goes to the mikvah, he could touch kachim. He's still an onain, he can't eat kachim, but he would be able to touch kachim, or if I guess he never even let down his guard to that extent, he would be able to eat kachim as well. And that's why we're talking about going to the mikveh, and then you can immediately touch kachim, not eat kachim, but touch kachim, because we're talking about he for sure is not tamid d'oraisa, but maybe he's tamid d'rabanan, but nothing that a little dip in the mikveh can't fix. Now, frag the Gemara, umi'ikan tirusa lepalga, but is this a thing? Is this a thing to say, well, I was careful about this, I wasn't careful about that, or do we say, look, were you careful or weren't you careful? If you weren't careful, then we have to assume the worst. So you can't, if the person isn't careful, then we can't trust him that he was only not careful to an extent. No. How does this work? Right, so mi'ikan and tirusa the palga, is there like partial being careful? In V'atanya, yes, there is partial being careful. I'll prove it from the following brisa. Odeyu asal al rosh, if a person has a basket on his head, and in the basket there are figs that are stuck together. There is also a shovel or a kind of scraper of sorts, something with kind of like a wide metal, not exactly necessarily a blade, but like a thin piece of metal that you can use to divide up. I'm going to call it a shovel. Okay. I'm going to call it a shovel just because it's referred to here as a magrefa, which is a kind of shovel. But the point is that it's a thin piece of metal that could be used to separate the figs. So you have a person who's got a basket. The basket is on his head. In the basket, there are figs. There is also a metal, a shovel that's used, little metal shovel that's used to divide up, to separate the figs. Now, right, so he says, Odeo asala rosho, he's got this basket on his head, umagrefa besocho, and in the basket there is this kind of shovel. Ve'omar, and he says, Libi al asal ve'in libi al amagrefa. He says, look, my heart was on the basket. I made sure that the basket remained tahor. However, I didn't have that same level of guarding for the shovel. And it could be that the shovel became tameh. Hasal tor v'amagrefa tmeh. So we say, okay, well, that's the case. He was careful about the basket, so the basket is tahor. He was not careful about the shovel, so the shovel is tameh. V'titami magrefa l'sal. So the Gemara suggests, okay, well, maybe then the shovel, which is tameh, and it's in the basket, shouldn't that make the basket tameh? Ein kli mitame kli, says the Gemara, well, one vessel can't be mitame. Another vessel, let's assume that at least for now, let's assume that the shovel became tameh from, let's say, an avatuma, so it's a rishon l'tuma. A rishon l'tuma cannot be mitame another vessel, right? Only an avatuma or above could be mitame a vessel. And therefore, we're assuming that this shovel was not on a higher enough level of tumah to be mitame the basket. So, ein kli mitame kli, a vessel cannot be mitame another vessel. V'titame masha b'soch. Okay, but shouldn't the shovel be able to be mitame the figs that are inside the basket? So this is where we get to these levels of guarding. On my Rava says Rava ba'omer, well, where the person with the basket on his head says, Shmartia midavar amitama, that look, when I say that my heart wasn't on the shovel, I don't mean that my heart wasn't on the shovel at all. No. It was on the shovel in terms of making sure that the shovel was not going to become tumah d'oraisa. It was not going to become, tameh, any level of tumah that would have been able to be mitame the figs. I was careful enough about that. But the thing is, it may have gotten tameh on some kind of a dirabanan level that it would be unable from being mitame the figs in there. Okay, very technical stuff. Honestly, I don't even really know what this dirabanan tumah would be exactly. But he says, look, I know that it wasn't tumah d'oraisa, right? In order for the shovel to be tameh d'oraisa, it would have had to have gotten tameh from at least an avatuma. And if it became tameh from an avatuma, it's a rishon l'tumah. Of course, a rishon l'tumah would be able to be mitame any food that was in the basket, because an avatuma, a rishon l'tumah is mitame ochlan umashkin. However, the guy says, look, I was careful to make sure that the shovel was not going to become tameh any tumah d'oraisa, which would be mitame the food. What I wasn't careful about is that maybe it got some kind of a level of tumah d'rabanan, which anyways wouldn't be able to be mitame the food anyways. So we see that, yes, it is possible to have levels of tumah, and therefore by the Tvul Yom, it is possible that Reuven the Kohen was careful not to become any kind of a tumah d'oraisa that he would become a Tvul Yom about, but maybe he could have gotten tameh, some kind of a dirabanan tumah that he can just hop in the mikveh and fix it, and for that he simply goes to the mikveh and problem solved. Okay, so that was essentially Rabbi Yirmiyah's suggestion that the reason why he's going to the mikvah is because he let down his guard with some kind of a dirabanan level of tumah that he could just go to the mikvah about it. Igalga milsa umatoi likame dirab abba bar mamu. Now this question about the question about our Mishnah in Zevachim saying that Reuven can touch Reuven the Kohen, the Onain can touch kachim, and the Mishnah in Chagiga, which says that he has to first go to the mikvah. This question made its way to Rabbi Bar Mamul. Amar Lehu, and Rabbi Bar Mamul says, "Lo shmielu had Amar B'Yechon Amar Rebbe." Do they not know about what Rabbi Yochanan said? The name of Rebbe, Ha'ochel Shlishi Shel Truma Osir Lechol Umuter Liga. Okay, it's another technical Truma thing. Before you get scared away, don't get scared away. Don't get scared away. We'll be done with this in a second. Ha'ochel shlishi shel truma. Truma, again, don't get scared away. Just hear me out for like 2 minutes and we'll be done with this. Ha'ochel shlishi shel truma. When it comes to tuma, right, at least tuma midaraisa, just very quickly, an avi avosa tuma is like a dead corpse. An ava tuma would be, for example, somebody who touches a dead corpse, alternatively, a zav, a nida, zava, things like that would be. An avatuma, if an avatuma touches, let's say, a person, that person becomes a rishon latuma. Without getting into, there's a million other details, but without, just keeping things on a high level, not even getting to all the daraisas. So this person would be a rishon latuma. A rishon latuma touches, let's say, food. That food becomes a sheni latuma. Now, truma can become a shlishi latuma. So if this food that's tamei touches truma, so let's say, so then that truma would be a shlishi latuma. So that's what we're talking about. Truma, that's a shlishi latuma. Okay. So, ha'ochel shlishi shel truma. Now, a person who eats truma that was a shlishi. Now, a shlishi letuma cannot be mitame a person. An avatuma can be mitame a person. In avi avosa tuma can be mitame a person. Not a shlishi letuma. Shlishi letuma cannot be mitame a person. Yet, nonetheless, a person who eats truma that was a shlishi letuma, right? Because chulin can't be a shlishi letuma. The max is a sheni letuma. But a person who eats truma that was, and probably a kohen who eats, let's assume a kohen who eats truma that was a shlishi letuma. So even though the kohen doesn't become tamei, shlishi can't be matami a person, but nonetheless, midarbanan we say, osir lechol umutuliga, and that's the point. Don't worry about all the details that we just said a minute ago. The point is that we see that in this case, the halacha is that this person, this kohen who ate a truma that was a shlishi letuma, we say that even though midoraisa, a shlishi can't be matamim, nonetheless we say midorabanan, he shouldn't be eating truma. Umutaliga, but he can touch truma. Because at the end of the day, he's not tamei. So we say he can touch truma. So what do we see? We see that there is in halacha a precedent for such a distinction between eating and touching. We see that this person who ate truma that was a shlishi is not allowed to eat truma, but he can touch it. So alma ba'achila avru rabbanan maila b'negia lo avru rabbanan maila. So we see that in this case, with the kohen who ate a truma that was shlishi, the chacham said we don't want him eating truma now, but he could still touch it. So we see that there's a special kind of maila that the chacham made, a special, let's say, call it a chumrah, let's say, but when it comes to eating the truma, but he can't touch it. So here also in Onain, this isn't just a maila midoraisa, he's not allowed to eat korbanis. But he can, even though he can't eat it, he can nonetheless touch it. So therefore, Babble Mamul says, look, the fact this isn't that big of a deal. For our Mishnah says he could touch truma. No, our Mishnah says that a kohen who's an onain can touch kodshin. The Mishnah in Chagiga says he has to go to the mikveh. Both are true. He does have to go to the mikveh. But he can also touch kodshim. If he wants to eat kodshim, he's going to have to go to the mikvah before he can again eat kodshim. But the whole time he could touch it. That's not a problem. So these two mishnahs are not contradicting. They're just saying two different halachas by an onain. A kohen is an onain, A, can touch korbanis. B, he has to go to the mikvah before he can be able to eat korbanis again. And now we get to an interesting sugya about an onain eating korbanis at night. It's a very interesting sugya because also this is really an entryway into this massive sugya, which is really going to start halfway through Saritesim Abayis. So we're really going to stop at halfway through the Amid over here. And sheesh, tomorrow, Cheva, come prepared. Tomorrow, I better come prepared. Tomorrow is going to be a big old daf. Hopefully I can get it out on time. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm struggling to get everything out. Anyways, tomorrow's going to be a big old daf, but now already, whereas like our entryway into, our entryway into Onain, and the halachas of Onain and Aninus Laila and Aninus Yom. So here we go. So ve'ein cholik lechol v'chule. So maflig hu de lo polig v'chi mezamne le ochil. Okay. So the Mishnah had said that an Onain, doesn't get, right, Ruvain the Onain, right, so it's a Ruvain the Kohen, his father Yaakov the Kohen died, so now Ruvain is an Onain. And we're saying he can't, let's read the Mishnah, what does it say? Onain no gay, okay, as we just talked about, he can touch Kodshim, ve'eno makriv, he can't do the avoda, ve'eno cholek lechol la'erev. So it says that he doesn't get his own portion, lechol la'erev, to eat at night, implying that he's allowed to eat it at night, implying that he's allowed to eat korbanis with everybody else at night, but he won't get his own portion. If his friend Shimon the Kohen says, "Hey, Reuben the Kohen, come, why don't you join me? I got a bunch of meat. Come, let's eat together." That would be okay. He doesn't get his own portion, but he can eat that night. Right? He doesn't get his own portion, but if his friend Shimon the Kohen invites him, Reuven the Kohen, to that night to eat meat together, kosher meat together, that would be acceptable. But Viramini, however, we have a question from a Mishnah in Psachim. The Mishnah in Psachim says, Onain tovel ve'ochel es pischol erev aval lo b'kodshim. That Reuven the Kohen, who is also an Onain, his father Yaakov the Kohen died. Now Reuven the Kohen is in Onain. Reuven the Kohen is an Onain. So we say that he goes to the mikvah, v'ochel pischol erev, and he can eat korban pesach that night. He can eat korban pesach that night. Goes to the mikvah and eats korban pesach that night. Avalo b'kodshim, but he can't eat kodshim. So while Reuven the Kohen, who's in Onain, can go to the mikvah and he can eat the korban pesach at the Pesach Seder, but he can't eat other kodshim. So now our Mishnah implied that he doesn't get his own portion, but he can eat kodshim meat that night. And yet the Mishnah in Psachim is saying that on Pesach, he can eat korban pesach that night at the Pesach Seder, but he can't eat other kodshim. So what's going on? So I'm Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti. So we're going to see two answers. The first one is from Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti. Lo kasha kam b'Pesach kam b'Shayim Mos Hashana. Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti actually makes a distinction between Pesach and every other night of the year. On Pesach, so first of all, let's make a distinction over here. Let's assume that Reuven's father died, right? So let's say Pesach, I'm going to use the example of Tuesday, okay? So Pesach was Tuesday night. Tuesday night was the Pesach Seder. So Tuesday was the 14th of Nisan. And then that night was the Pesach Seder. Reuven's father, Yaakov, died on Tuesday. So that means that all of Tuesday, let's say he died at 8 in the morning on Tuesday, okay? So all of Tuesday, Reuven the Kohen is in Onain Midoraisa. All day Tuesday, Reuven the Kohen is in Onain Midoraisa. Tuesday night, however, he's only in Onain Midorabona. Now, when it comes to Korban Pesach, which is a mitzvah's essay that has a chiyuv karis associated with it, we say, okay. Korban Pesach, the Chacham say, okay, at night, we're not going to say he's in Onain at night. Normally, Aninus Laila is also he's in Onain Midorabonon, but not on Seder night. Seder night is, right, the Korban Pesach is more important than being in Onain at night, and therefore they say Korban Pesach, Reuven the Kohen can eat. And guess what else we say? Migo. We say Migo, since he can eat the Korban Pesach on Seder night. Also, if there were other korbanis that he wanted to eat that night, he can also eat them. Since he can eat the Korban Pesach, and Aninus Laila is waived, right? Aninus Laila Midorabanan is waived in order to allow Reuven to eat the Korban Pesach. So that night, on Pesach night, he can also eat other korbanos. If Shimon the Kohen says, look, I have some other korbanos here that I want to eat, he can eat those as well. Now, the rest of the nights of the year, however, is in Onain Midorabanan, and he can't eat korbanis. Even though there's a mitzvah's essay of V'achlu osam asher kupa boim, it doesn't matter. Aninus Laila, he should stay away from eating other korbanos. And therefore, our Mishnah that says that he doesn't get his own portion, but he can eat korbanos at night, that's talking about Seder night. the Mishnah in Pesachim that says that while he's allowed to eat the korban Pesach, he's not allowed to eat other korbanos. That's talking about every other night of the year. He would not be allowed to eat korbanis, since he's an Onain midrabanan. So again, Amar B'Yirmi B'Difti says, B'Yirmi B'Difti lo kasha kan Pesach kan b'shari mos hashana. The Pesach, when it comes to Seder night, I did the Achel Pesach, since already he's eating the Korban Pesach at the Pesach Seder, so Achel Nami Kodshim, he can also eat other korbanos, right? If Shimon, his friend, Shimon the Kohen says, look, there was some korban chatases today, I've got some meat, do you want to eat with me? He could say, so on Pesach night, since he's already allowed to eat the korban Pesach, he can eat those, Reuven can eat those korbanos as well. B'shai Mos Hashana, but the rest of the days of the year, Tilo Chazi, where he's an Onain, and he's a Ninas Laila, Midrabanan, Lo Chazi, or Lo Achil is a different version, he can't eat the korbanos at night. Umay Aval Lo Be'Kodshim, and to explain the Mishnah in Pesachim that says that a Kohen can eat the korban, and Kohen who's an Onain can eat the korban Pesach at night, but not other Kodshim, Aval Lo Be'Kodshim Shal Kol Hashana, it means the rest of the year he would be unable to eat Kodshim at night. Rav Asi says differently. Rav Asi says, Lo Kasha Kanchemes lo meis barba osor v'kovo barba osor kanchemes lo meis b'shlosha osor v'kovo be'arba osor. Okay, Rav Asi says, Rav Asi makes a different distinction. He makes a distinction about when Yaakov died and when he was buried. But as we said, Pesach Seder is Tuesday night. Korban Pesach is offered on Tuesday. Look, if Yaakov died on Tuesday, so then all day Tuesday, Reuven is going to be in Onain Midoraisa, and Tuesday night, he's going to be in Onain Midorabanan. In terms of Korban Pesach, he'll be able to eat Korban Pesach, because Korban Pesach is a mitzvah essay that is a chiyuv kares associated with it. The Chacham weren't going to interfere with Korban Pesach, and he can eat Korban Pesach. But because he's an Onain Midorabanan that night, he shouldn't be eating other korbanos, which is what the Mishnah in Pesachim says. Right? It says an Onain tovel v'ochel, right, korban Pesach at night, but not other korbanos, because he's an Onain midrabanan. So while the Rabbanan are not going to override korban Pesach, he'll eat korban Pesach, but not other korbanos. However, if Yaakov died not on Tuesday but on Monday, which means that on Monday Reuven was an Onain midoraisa. On Monday Reuven was an Onain midoraisa. Monday night, Reuven was an Onain midorabanan, and he remained in Onain midorabanan until Yaakov was buried on Tuesday. But comes Tuesday night, there isn't even Anino's Laila anymore. So we're saying, on Tuesday, Reuven is an Onain midorabanan. On Tuesday, right, because Yaakov died on Monday. Monday, Reuven was an Onain midoraisa. Monday night, he was an Onain midorabanan. He continued to be an Onain midorabanan until Yaakov was buried on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, Reuven is still an Onain midorabanan, but we say he'll go to the mikvah and he'll eat korban Pesach that night, and he can also, in this case, eat other korbanos as well, because the Tuesday night is not even an Onain midorabanan anymore. Even during the day, he was only an Onain midorabanan. So on Monday, he was Onain midoraisa. Monday night, he was Onain midorabanan. By Tuesday night, Yaakov's already buried. Tuesday night, he's not even an Onain midorabanan anymore. And therefore, he can eat other korbanos as well. So says Rav Asi, it depends when Yaakov died. So again, I have to find where. Rav Asi Omer says, Rav Asi, lo kasha, kansha meislo, barba aser, v'cover barba aser. Look, right, so one scenario is where Yaakov died on Tuesday, on the 14th, and he was buried on the 14th. Kansha meislo b'shlosha aser. However, alternatively, Yaakov died on the 13th, on Monday, v'cover barba aser, and they buried him then on Tuesday, on the 14th. I'm going to add some words here to kind of flesh this out. Meis biyudalid, when Yaakov dies on the 14th, on Tuesday, v'cover biyudalid, and he was buried on Tuesday, Yom Misa Tafis Leilo Midrabanan, which means that Tuesday night at the Seder, he's still an Onain Midrabanan. And therefore, he shouldn't be eating other korbanos. He eats the korban pesach, but not other korbanos. Meis lo meis b'yud gimel v'kavu b'yadalit. However, when Yaakov died on Monday, on the 13th, and he was buried on Tuesday, on the 14th, well, in that case, back in the Gemara, Yom Kvura lo tavas leilo. What's the vav? Afilu midrabanan. However, in that case, when Yaakov died on the 13th, but was buried on the 14th, so then Seder night, Reuven is no longer an Onain, even midrabanan, and he can eat other korbanos as well. So therefore, our Mishnah that talks about being able to eat korbanos at night, that's talking about when he's no longer in Onain. When it's talking about when he's an Onain midrabanan during the day, but the following night he's not an Onain at all. So in that case, our Mishnah is talking about he can eat korbanos that night. But if he was an Onain midoraisa and that night is Onain midrabanan, then he can't eat korbanos that night. Friends, we're going to stop here. Tomorrow, I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a major daf. When am I going to learn all this? I might just have to stay up all night. We'll have to see. I have a feeling that's what's going to happen. But anyways, we are gonna tomorrow's gonna be a major daf. We're going to talk all about Onains. But this was Daf Tzadi Tes of Masechta Zevachim. On Daf Tzadi Tes of Masechta Zevachim, we discussed dividing up korbin meat. We had said that in order to get a portion of korbin meat, you have to meet two criteria. Those who can do Zrikas Adam, you have to be able to do Zrikas Adam, be able to do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, and also be able to eat the meat. A Kohen Gadol who can do the Avodah but can't eat, or a Katan who can eat but can't do the Avodah, don't get their own portions. There is one exception, which is a Baal Mum. A Baal Mum, even though he does not do the Avodah, we have the pasuk of Kol Zocher B'Kriyanim or something like that. That comes to include a Baal Mum to say that he does nonetheless get a portion, even though he can't do the Avodah. We discussed in Onain touching korbanos. That was a major, kind of very technical and got into a lot of tumah kind of things. We had a question that our Mishnah says that an Onain can touch korbanos, but we have a Mishnah in Chagiga that says that an Onain has to go to the mikveh, implying that he can't touch korbanos. So Rabbi Yirmiyah's answer was that the kohen is permitted to touch korbanos when he was careful to remain completely pure. If he was careful to remain completely pure, he could touch the korbanos. Otherwise, if he was careful about the oraisas, and maybe it's possibly became tamei maybe on a derabanan where just simply going to the mikveh will fix it, so then he goes to the mikveh and then he can touch the korbanos. But if we're concerned about tumah de oraisa, even just tumah sheretz, he can't touch the korbanos. So be tamei at full yom, at least till the evening. Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo says that actually there's a very simple answer, which is that be'etzem and Onain is allowed to touch korbanos, he just can't eat them. That's it. And before he eats it, he has to go to the mikvah. Kilu, we saw a distinction from, for example, somebody who eats truma that's a shlishi l'tumah, even though technically he's ta'or, because a shlishi can't make a person tummy, but nonetheless we say, don't eat truma, but you can touch truma. So we see that there is a distinction to be made between eating and touching. So an Onain simply can touch truma, can touch kodshim, sure, he can't eat it. He can't do the avodah. He'll have to go to the mikvah before he can eat it, like the Mishnah says in Chagiga. But this is all just nothing fancy here. It's just literally these are the halachos of Onain. And finally, we discussed in Onain eating korbanis at night. Rabbi Yirmiyah Midifti says it's permitted on Seder night, since an Onain is allowed to eat the korbin pesach, which is in mitzvahs esim midoraisa, which has a chiyuv kares associated with it. So an Onain can eat korbin pesach at night, on Seder night. So since he can eat korbin pesach, he can also eat other korbanos at night when he's an Onain, even though he's an Onain midorabanan. But other nights of the year, he would not be allowed to eat korbanos at night. Rav Asi says that when the burial is the same day as the death, which means that he's an Onain midoraisa during the day and midorabanan at night, he can't eat any korbanos. However, if the burial was on a different day than the death, which means on the day of the burial he was only an Onain midorabanan, that night he's not going to be an Onain at all, and he would be able to eat the korbanos. Friends, that was Daf 99 of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.